Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, both to our live audience as well as those tuning in online. You are at Chabad of Cary. This is our weekly lunch and learn. For all those tuning in, special thanks to Nissan Communications for making this possible. And you can support the program by hitting the donate button on the Nissan Communications page. Today's discussion is going to be the history and deeper meaning of music in Judaism. If I actually ask you a trivia question, where is the first mention of music in the Torah? It might come as a surprise.
Is it before Miriam's tambourine?
Well before Miriam. What is the first mention of music or musical instruments in...
David's lyre? No.
Well before 5 books of Moses. Well before King David.
The angels sing somewhere.
The angel sings. Oh,
So we have the angelic singing, but I'm talking here on earth.
here on earth. The birds.
That's
The
snake.
The snake?
snake
No.
was slithering. I don't remember any singing involved with the snake.
Well, you got to sing to Eve to get her to do those
Okay,
things.
okay. But I'm talking about a specific mention in the text itself of music. All right. So we'll have to see that. All right. I wanted to know how much of these verbs will be. All right, I know that, and how much of this will be new. So let's start from the beginning. We are on page 130. And by way of introduction, I think we all know music is powerful. How often is it that we will be...
Is it working? Amnon is the...
Is the microphone working?
I mean, I can hear you, but I was just wondering because it's until other people are talking, I wouldn't know. So just tap on it.
Anything? I've tapped twice.
Go ahead again. Yes, it's working.
Fantastic. It is working. So how often is it that we're in the middle of doing a chore or going about our regular business and we start singing a song to ourselves? Now, what does that show? That shows that music is touching us in a deep place, in our subconscious. The flip side is also true. Often we will hear a song and we will remember a place, a time when we heard that same song. It will all of a sudden transport us to another place. That shows us that it has a very deep power. Now, the thing with things that have a deep power, it shows it has a lot of holiness and strength. The flip side is also true. The stronger the power, the stronger the strength, I think you would also say is the potential for, God forbid, unholiness, because it is touching us in a very deep place. Is that making sense? If something only hits us in a very conscious, very physical way, we know what its damage is. It's only hitting us in the way that we see its effect. But music hits us in a deep place. We don't even realize what it is doing to us. It shows us its tremendous power. As we'll see today, also we have to be careful and wary with music. So how does this come into the Parsha? The Parsha discusses the Levites. The Jews are traveling about the desert, and as they are traveling about the desert, the Kohanim, the priest's job, is to do the service inside of the sanctuary. But in addition to Kohanim, the priests, there are also Levites. What do the Levites do?
Play music.
Well, in the actual scriptures, what does it say that the Levites did? You can quickly, I don't want to do this inside because of lack of time, but on page 130 and 131, there are 3 different families of Levites, and they were schleppers. They would carry things. They would have to carry the portable sanctuary as the Jews traveled for 40 years around the desert. And there was one family that schlepped the holy vessels, the menorah, the ark. There was another family that carried the curtains and the ropes. And there was a third family that carried the heavy stuff, which is planks of wood, beams, sockets, so on and so forth. And the verse tells us that from 30 to 50, well, let's do on page 132, text 2a. Hal, why don't you begin? 2a, 132.
From the age of 30 years and upward, till the age of 50 years, who are fit to perform the service for the service and the work of the carrying in the tent of meeting.
So the work of the carrying, we know what that is. What is the service? What is the avodah of the Levites? So we need oral tradition there. Rashi oral tradition tells us what is the service of the service. How did to be as well?
To perform the service for the service. This refers to the music with cymbals and harps, which is a service for another service.
While the sacrifices were happening, while the prayers were happening, there was music in the background. Who did that? The Levites. That was their big job in addition to schlepping. Okay. Where in scriptures do we specifically see the Levites? This is from the oral tradition. Where in scriptures do we specifically see that the Levites did have this role? If you go to Chronicles, it mentions King David. Brian, text 3.
And David said to the leaders of the Levites to station their brethren, the singers, with musical instruments, psalteries, and harps and cymbals, resounding to raise a voice in joy.
Look at the oral tradition. The symphony was quite sophisticated. They had a very, very complex both choir as well as symphony. And there were actually rules in halacha about how they should sound. I mean, you would think they could sound however they wanted to sound, right? You know, they like this instrument, they like that instrument. No, text 4, Barry.
There was never to be less than 12 Levites standing on the platform.
Text 4 on 134.
Yes. There would,
The
the
Levite
Levite orchestra was not to have less than 2 harps, or more than 6, or less than 2 flutes, or more than 12. There was never to be less than 12 Levites standing on the platform, and the number could be increasing to infinity. No minor could enter the court of the sanctuary to take part in the service except when the Levites stood up to sing, nor did they join in the singing of harp and lyre, but with the mouth alone to add flavor to the music.
So there was a children's choir going on as well, and that was the only time that children were allowed into the sanctuary, into the Beis Hamikdash. So this is pretty sophisticated. We have instruments.
What year would this be? I'm just somewhat amazed sometimes at
Sure.
technology they had way back in what year?
Right. Well, let me ask a question. In historically, what musical instruments do we have a few thousand years ago? Before we get into the Torah's accounts.
Lyre,
Maybe a
Percussion.
flute.
Percussion instruments.
Yeah.
horn,
Drum.
the chauffeur, don't forget.
Oh, yeah.
Shofar, the
The
shofar.
voice.
Voice, certainly.
The shofar, that's a really good one.
When are we talking about? This
This is in the first temple, right?
This is First Temple. So this would be 2,500 years ago.
King David used the harp.
Correct.
and lyre.
Yeah, horn.
25, a little bit more. So they had these instruments, harps, flutes, percussions. And I think that matches up well with right, that there were such instruments around at that time. There are also some odd instruments we don't have today. If you notice, text 6 talks about a magrefa, which had 10 holes that produced different types of sounds. I wouldn't know a magrefa if I saw one, but it's interesting that there was all sorts of musical instruments that was around. Yeah.
Rabbi, it said no minor. Does it mean no Levite minor? No minor altogether? Were there minors that could come in and sing if they weren't Levites?
No, it was only, at least these were Levites that stood on a platform that were singing directly opposite the service that was taking place. Only Levites were in it.
So only Levite children could be
In this specific choir. They were charged with this task. The Levites were. Now, if you think about it, the Levites in biblical times, they actually didn't own land. The priests were busy doing what they were doing, working in the temple. The Levites had a lot of time to work on their craft. So it makes sense that they could do a pretty good job of it. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the medieval philosopher, writes in page 7, on text 7, on page 137, continuing.
The art of music is prominent in a nation which respects song and allocates them to the aristocracy of the people, namely the Levites, who engaged in song in the honored house at honored times. They did not need to engage in livelihood, for they would receive the tithe, and they had no occupation but music. This craft is highly esteemed among mankind as long as it is not abused and degraded, and the people preserve its original nobleness and purity.
So it's interesting to think of a whole tribe that was dedicated to the large part to music. Again, it was only while they were traveling in the desert that they had to do the schlepping. Once the sanctuary was positioned in one place, the Levites, they were musicians. So
when did they do this though? They didn't do it on Shabbat, I guess, right?
No, they actually did.
So they played.
So this is they did music on Shabbat, which makes for a very interesting discussion. When in halacha did that change, and why there was a time when it was only allowed in the sanctuary and not anywhere else? But I think it's a good question. So I think after in Milton we called it a blue card question. Right? It's another for another time. It's a very, very good question. It did happen on Shabbat. It did happen on holidays. So this sort of sets the stage of the Parsha. In the Parsha, the Levites did a lot of singing. Throughout Jewish history, they did singing. The fact that the Torah would say that a group of people should be doing this as part of the avodah shows that it has a holiness to it and an importance to it. What is that? What is the philosophy? What is the meaning behind music in Judaism? That was our introduction. Now we're going to dive into what is the role of music? Why would Torah place it on such a pedestal?
But don't we also have the tropes when you're reading Torah? I mean, you're adding those musical notes to provide more deeper meaning to it. Obviously emotional, it touches upon that. You have to have that not totally intellectual reading of concepts.
Good. Why is Torah sung, chanted, and not said? So one is singing touches your emotions. Anyone else want to suggest something?
Well, there's the practical. We're much better at remembering song than words.
Yeah.
Very good. So you immediately remember it. So emotions, memory. Anyone else want to suggest something?
Well, in all of the prayers, it always says for the choir master.
Mm.
So you know what you imagine trumpets.
Correct. So a lot of the Tehillim, Psalms, and a lot of our prayers do come from Psalms, mention the choir master and the trumpets and the shofars. So it was a very prominent part of the service that took place. Yeah.
And Roger, and I want to encourage anybody who's out there live streaming to just put your name into the chat so that you can comment and ask questions. Roger, who's out there, said the purpose might be to elevate the spiritual experience in mind, body, and spirit.
Okay. So music has that ability. It touches us in a deeper way, as we will explain, than words do, than ideas do. How is that? Why is that? We will get there. Going back to my trivia question I started off with, where is the first time in Torah it's mentioned? Believe it or not, at the way beginning of the Torah in Genesis, it talks about the children of Adam. And Adam had this child, and they had that child, and they had that child, and we have a bunch of generations until we get to Noah. But along the way, we have a few accomplishments of some of the children. One of them, it says, discovered mules, and what it means is he made a crossbreed between a horse and a donkey. Why that fun fact is important for us to know, I don't know. Another person, it discusses making weaponry, an iron. And then we have Yuval. Text 8a, Genesis chapter 4, verse 21. This is one of those verses that, again, no one remembered it from Genesis because we focus on the big stories of Genesis, not this stuff. But it is interesting that the Torah cares to share with us. Text 8a. And
his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who grasp a lyre and a flute.
so he was the big inventor.
He needs to have more prominence.
Yuval. Well, Yuval today, truth is a Jewish name. And a lot of these other names of the children of Adam are not. But the Torah cares to share with us the inventor of the flute and the kinnor. The other famous example someone mentioned is Miriam, 8b. This is after the splitting of the sea.
Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women came out after her with timbrels and with dances.
Okay, so that is a example of the Shirat Miriam, the Song of Miriam, and perhaps most famous is King David.
You know, and the thing about joyful noise, make a joyful noise. I wonder if that's referring to music.
Good.
The singing.
Good. Simcha, joy, is huge in Judaism, and we'll see in a moment how music can very much raise a person's spirits.
And the last Tehillim, Psalm 150, brings in all of the musical instruments, and then it's Kol Hashema.
Correct. Praise God with the shofar, with the sound of this and the sound of that, and it finishes off all the neshama should praise God. Almost associating that when we do it with music, we're putting all of our soul into it. Very beautiful. Chapter 115 Tehillim. So King David, most famous, do a 9a and 9b, please, Judy? Oh, Debbie. I'm sorry.
Roger says Mizmor Shir. He's referring to
All across Tehillim. Mizmor Shir. Mizmor Shir. This is a song of shir, songs. So that is the whole Tehillim is full of songs. And one of the reasons is King David, who traditionally is the author of Psalms, was such a musician. Where do we see that? 9a.
Okay, and also the priests had bells along the bottom of their garments.
Correct. The priests had the bells, just the high priest. So that was more of a noise that was just being made. It wasn't any intent on making it. It was chattering of noise. But it wasn't like there was a specific way that they were trying to produce that music.
And David and all the house of Israel made merry with all manner of instruments of cypress wood, and with harps, and with psalteries, and with timbrels, and with sistra, and with cymbals. I don't know what sistra is.
Anyone know what sistra is? The Hebrew doesn't help me. Min an in. I don't know. We know King David most famous with the harp. That is what we associate him with. But it mentions all these musical instruments, and going back to Psalms, the whole book of Tehillim is King David pouring his heart out to God. There's a lot of Psalms where we see anger, some are love, some are fear. One thing is for sure, King David spoke to God in an intimate and passionate way. And it would make sense how that goes well with music. And we see that King David not only played music for himself, but in text 9b, Judy.
And it would be that when the Spirit of God was upon Saul, that David would take the harp and would play with his hand, and Saul would be relieved. And it would be good for him, and the spirit of evil would depart from him.
When Saul would have periods, King Shaul would have periods of depression, one of King David's jobs was to cheer him up via the harp. That didn't last so long. Eventually, King Shaul wanted to kill David. But at a certain point in time, King David's job was...
The first music critic.
There we go. Fantastic.
So the sitram are ancient Egyptian percussion instruments consisting of looped metal frames set in a handle and fitted with loose crossbars that rattle when shaken. Kind of like groggers.
There we go. All right, this is enough in terms of going around the Tanakh and finding scriptures. We could do more. Now let's go a little bit. What is the meaning to it? So the Talmud tells us not only that prayer should be with music, but when Jews traditionally study Talmud or any other text, they would always sing it or use a funny kind of tone like this. And when someone asked a question, they would go like this, and then they would answer like this, and they would always be chanting and singing Torah in some manner to one another.
That's the reason for the sing-song.
Could be. So what does the Talmud say about this, Hal? Text 10a?
Rabbi Shifatiah said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, if one reads the scripture without a melody or repeats the Mishnah without a tune, of him the scripture says, wherefore I give them also statutes that were not good, etc.
They're not putting any emotion into their Torah study. That seems to suggest that it's not good. The Talmud writes that emotion and singing go hand in hand, and our Torah should be. Perhaps that is why Torah is always chanted. Someone else mentioned the fact that it helps us with our memory. That is what one of the commentators says about that. You can see for yourself. Tosfot 10b, it was the practice to study Mishnah with a tune that would help them memorize it. Remember that for many years, the oral tradition was only passed down orally. It was not written down. So we can only imagine how critical songs were to maintaining, to keeping that information. Let us now go a little bit deeper. Maimonides, who is very rational, he's usually not seen as one of the more mystical of our scholars. Excuse me, this is Nachmanides, text 11, not Maimonides. We'll get to him soon. He writes something very interesting. Text 11.
There is nothing more abstract in the material world than music.
It is of the materialistic world, and yet it's abstract. It's subtle. It's deeper. If we talk about pleasures of the physical world, you can have good food, you can have, your team winning. There are lots of types of pleasure. He's saying music is the most abstract of physical types of pleasures. Now, of course, there are spiritual pleasures as well. We're not talking about that. It still is something physical. It's being played with physical instruments, but it's abstract. It's more subtle.
See it or
you can't see it, you can't touch it, but it's physical.
It's there.
It's there.
It's words.
So we therefore see that it would have the ability to make things hit us in a deeper place. The Chinuch, Rabbi Aaron Halevi of Barcelona, writes, what was the function of blowing all the trumpets in the temple? Barry, do you want to read?
The reason for the mitzvah of blowing trumpets in the temple, when a sacrifice is offered, the people involved are required to rid their minds of all thoughts and focus upon it attentively, pointing their minds with intense concentration on God, who commanded the mitzvah. Similarly, during the time of trouble, when the trumpets are blown, a person must be fully focused when pleading with God to have mercy and save him from all trouble. For this reason, we are commanded to blow trumpets at these times, since naturally a person is coarse, he needs to be driven. Without motivation, a person would naturally lie idle. It is well known that there is nothing quite rousing like the strains of music, certainly so with the trumpet, which is the most powerful of musical instruments.
So if you have to take someone who's not in the mood and give them kavanah, give them intent, help them focus, help them get rid of all other thoughts, music is a powerful tool to do that. Certainly it says the trumpet, we know it from Rosh Hashanah, but it was a regular occurrence in the temple. Now let's go to Maimonides. Maimonides has a section of his work where he speaks about the importance of being mindful in everything that we do. That every part of our day should be directed towards a higher cause, whether that is work, whether that is food, whether that is recreation. But as humans, we don't just do things. When we just do things, we are sinking to a level of an animal because we are running on instinct. And as such, we should be mindful and focused throughout our day. This is a longer text, but it's an important one. And there's a lot we could talk about in this text. I just want to focus on the musical component of it. Here goes text 13 from Maimonides.
It is the duty of man to subordinate all the faculties of the soul to his reason. He must keep his mind's eye fixed constantly upon one goal namely the attainment of the knowledge of God, as far as it is possible for mortal man to know him. Consequently, one must so adjust all his actions, his whole conduct, and even his very words, that they lead to this goal, in order that none of his deeds be aimless, and thus prevent the attainment of that evil.
Easier said than done, right? Every part of our life is directed towards a higher cause, which is being an intellectual person and specifically in the pursuit of God. All right?
So his only design in eating and drinking, sleeping and waking, moving about and resting, should be the preservation of bodily health, while in turn the reason for the latter is that the soul and its agencies may be in sound and perfect condition, so that he may readily acquire wisdom and gain moral and intellectual virtues, all to the end that man may reach the highest goal of his endeavors. Accordingly, man will not direct his attention merely to obtain bodily enjoyment, choosing of food and drink and in all other matters only the most pleasurable, but he will seek out the most useful, being indifferent whether it is pleasurable or not.
Healthy food. Okay.
There are indeed times when the pleasurable may be used from a curative point of view, as for instance, when one suffers from loss of appetite, it may be stirred up by highly seasoned delicacies and pleasurable foods. Similarly, one who suffers from melancholia may rid himself of it by listening, singing, and all kinds of instrumental music, by strolling among beautiful gardens and edifices, by gazing upon beautiful pictures and other things that enliven the mind and dissipate gloomy moods. The purpose of all this is to restore the healthful condition of the body, but the real object is in maintaining the body in good health is to acquire wisdom. Likewise, in the pursuit of wealth, the main design in its acquisition should be to expand it for noble purposes and to employ it for the maintenance of the body and the preservation of life, so that its owner may obtain a knowledge of God insofar as that is vouchsafed unto man.
Interesting text. He speaks about, there are times in life to pamper yourself a little bit. Why? For the purpose of getting yourself back in better spirits that you can go about what your business is. And he says, what is his cure to depression? Music. So Maimonides mentions music as having a very powerful effect on a person to lift them out of. Okay. Any questions, comments before we go further?
Let me see if there's anything.
Okay.
Nothing online right now.
Okay. There is another text where it's very interesting. He discusses the menorah, which we read about in this week's Torah portion. And the menorah in the temple had 7 candles. And it said that all 7 candles, though, sort of faced the center. And Rabbi Yonasan Eivshitz, who was a Talmudist living in the 16 and 1700s, discusses 7 different types of sciences and arts. And he says each one of them have great value, but the purpose is that they should all assist us in better understanding God and being a better person. And he discusses all sorts of biology, astronomy, and math, and one of his 7 is music. Text 14.
Regarding the art of music, we need not even mention. The art of music opens a window to the cantillation, marks, and the songs in the Torah, as well as the music of the Levites. There are songs designed to gladden the heart and remove depression, instilling a sense of joy into the soul to facilitate a godly spirit, as was the habit of the prophets. How great is the power of this art! All the angels and celestial hosts raise their voices in song, in a harmonious pattern of full voices paired with shorter ones. All of these songs are rooted in the wisdom of truth, and each rhythm has a supernal root.
So he's saying music is rooted in something especially holy. Now let's go to Kabbalah. How do you say a song in Hebrew?
Shir.
Shir is one. Good. A lot of people on the Shabbat table, they sing what's called Zmirot, Zemer. Zemer means music or a tune. Zemer in Hebrew also means something very different. It means to weed. If you're a gardener, you're taking out the weeds. Lizamer. Lizamer aritzim, to weed, to get rid of all the weeds. And in Kabbalah, there's Rabbi Yitzchak Abuav, who writes in an ancient work, text 15.
I found it written that for this reason, the songs and chants and prayer are called ZEMOR. This word is connected with the Hebrew word pruning. Just as one prunes away the undesirables in his orchard and leaves the quality branches to grow, in this understanding, the song and praise we utter before prayers prune away the obstructions and sins that stand between us and God, so that when our prayers ascend to God, they are acceptable and favorable before Him.
So he writes, when we sing our tefillos, when we sing our prayers, A, that helps our own concentration, but B is that has a ability to weed away our negativity and our sins and allow the tefillos to ascend in a more pure state. Zemirot, Zemer. One of the times in Jewish history when music gained a renaissance would definitely be when Hasidim, the Baal Shem Tov Hasidim. And one of the reasons for that is it was very big in temple times. But after the destruction of the temple, there was a certain time and place where people thought that music was not appropriate. They were mourning over the destruction of the temple, and they thought that, and this is mentioned in certain places in halacha as well, we shouldn't be too joyous, and we shouldn't use too much music. That was something special in Talmudic times. And the Baal Shem Tov breathed a renaissance in Jewish music. They put a great emphasis on simcha and happiness. And if you go to all of the Hasidic groups, they all have nigunim. They all have certain melodies that they would sing when they would get together. And that became a hallmark of all Hasidic groups. There's a small Hasidic group known as the Mojitzer Hasidim. And they're not big. They're a little bit in Brooklyn and Israel. But they are best known for, not Hasidic discourses, not Kabbalah, but their tunes, nigunim. The Mojitzer Rebbe was once very sick, and he actually, unfortunately, needed an amputation. And there was a problem, and they were unable to give him the anesthesia and I don't know if anesthesia was around in, goodness, what year was this? 1800s? What would have been available then?
We had chloroform by then.
Okay, he lived from 1849 to 1920. I don't know. In any event, he said, I will sing my Nigun. This is something that he would sing every single day, and it will put me into another place, into another realm. And when you see me no longer responding, at that point, you should begin the operation. And that is indeed what happened. That is one famous story of the Mojitzer Hasidim. I should note another famous story of the Mojitzer Hasidim, what happened in the Holocaust, when many of the cantor of the Mojitz synagogue was taken away in the cattle cars, and it was horrific, and people were dying even in the cars. And at that time, he was singing the Shema to himself, and he also was thinking about the words that I believe in a better time. I believe in the coming of Mashiach, that one day this world will not look like the way it is right now, but it will be a perfect world of peace. And the words in Hebrew are Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema b'viat HaMashiach. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of Mashiach. And he said those words to himself, and all of a sudden he started singing a melody, which perhaps many of you know. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema b'viat HaMashiach. He started singing this, which is today a famous melody. And slowly, from cabin to cabin, people started joining in this melody on the way to Auschwitz. And right then and there, he said, this is a powerful Nigun. I want a way to save this Nigun, because I don't know who's going to survive this. And he asked a few people to try, to give him some pen and paper. He wrote down the notes to it right then and there. And in fact, there were a few people who jumped off of the cars. They managed to get out. One broke a leg. They survived. And they survived, and they brought that Nigun to the Mojitzer Rebbe, who had escaped the war and was in New York, and they sang it the next Yom Kippur. That is something about the Mojitzer Hasidim. In any event, so if you ever hear that Ani Ma'amin, you should know and it's really sung in all movements in Judaism today, that Ani Ma'amin, you should know the history behind it. In Chabad too, Nigunim are very powerful and very popular. The founder of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, who wrote the Tanya, authored 10 nigunim. One in Keliata we sing often here on Shabbat, but there were 10 different nigunim that he would write. Text 10a is from the previous Rebbe, who wrote as follows. 18a, excuse me, page 151. Okay.
Song and music is one of the practices and methods of divine service that the Hasidim have as a tradition from the Baal Shem Tov. The Alter Rebbe was once invited to deliver a Torah discourse at a wedding in Vitebsk. The Alter Rebbe delivered a sharp and brilliant discourse comprised of advanced logic, all delivered as he spoke very quickly. The audience was very impressed, and the Alter Rebbe said that the tongue is the pen of the heart. The audience then requested that the Alter Rebbe sing a song, for when the Alter Rebbe learned or prayed, they would not be able to tear themselves away from the sweetness of his singing. The Alter Rebbe obliged and sang a Nigun, and he then said, the tongue is the pen of the heart, and the song is the pen of the soul.
This became a famous Hasidic saying. The tongue might be the pen of the heart, but the song is the pen of the soul. How do you understand those words?
You know, I think that music can take you places that mere words cannot. You know, the melody itself can transport you. And I think, like most women, you know, what they would tell you when you were having babies, same thing, is to go that way so you could sing yourself away without having to have anesthesia.
Also, music is a universal language.
And you know, that is amazing, too, how even people who don't speak any language can pick up on it.
And that's a sign that it's deeper. Again, the more that there are differences, that shows it's coming from a more external place. But when something is beyond language or beyond words, that shows a deeper place. In fact, this is one of the reasons why many of the Chabad Nigunim do not have words. And one of the reasons is words give a certain meaning, they limit the meaning of the song, while when it is a wordless melody, then it transcends any specific words. Yeah.
It's interesting that the Reform movement, maybe 35% of the service is song.
So this
making
is
that up to 35%,
A lot.
but it's a
It's a
lot.
lot.
Yeah.
And they do bring instruments and play them
Yes.
during Shabbat.
exactly. And this is one of the areas we'd have to have a separate discussion with halacha. It spoke about Shabbat and Yantiv not having music, but in other movements, even those that are observant, there is a very strong emphasis. It's just not during the prayers on Shabbat. But nigunim, singing songs in groups, and especially for meditation, that's a powerful part. At the Rebbe's Farbrengens, the way it would work is the Rebbe would give a talk, and between each one of the talks, what do? They sing nigunim. That is what they did. They spent 15, 20 minutes singing a song over and over and over, and then there was another talk. And then they sing another song over and over. So, you know, from a superficial perspective, it's, all right, you know, we need to have a little bit of a breather until, you know, we can't have talks forever, and the Rebbe has to sort of regain his composure and think what he's going to say next. No. The song itself was supposed to take you to a deeper place. And in fact, I'll save that story for another time.
Well, what is altar reading?
The old Rebbe. In Chabad, there were 7 Rebbes, and at a certain point in time, they called the first the Alter Rebbe as the old Rebbe, who was the first of the 7. So his son then explained his father's statement. What does it mean when my dad said that the song is the pen of the soul? And he wrote as follows. Here it goes, 18b.
We find that song has the power to reach the essence of the soul, namely the yehida of the soul, a deep-seated point that completely transcends logic. This is demonstrated by the fact that when one plays music with various instruments that display profound wisdom and art, the true depth of his intellectual grasp, that which cannot be expressed verbally to another, finds expression in the music. What's more, even with regards to the profundity that the person has not himself yet grasped due to its depth and abstractness, he cannot explain to another whatsoever when he plays music. He feels as if he truly understands it. The same is true when singing vocally.
To explain Yechida is the most essential part of our soul, and it's saying music is able to touch the Yechida, a place that we normally don't access through ideas or through words. This is amazing because it tells us what the power of music is. However, this also tells us something else, and that is that when you listen to someone's music, you are connecting to their essence of their soul. When they wrote the words or when they put forth the tune, it was their soul, not just their brain, but their soul going into it. So we have to ask ourselves the questions before we listen to music. I don't want to sound all, is this a person to whom soul I want to be connected to?
Right. I think that's true. Like some of the writers.
Because it's not innocent. It's deep and it's powerful. And again, the fact that it affects us subconsciously, the fact that we don't even realize when we're singing a tune, the fact that it touches us in a place that ideas cannot, that is because it's hitting our yechida. We need to be careful about what music goes into our ears. We know the effect of what we see, and we speak about that often, and the effect of what we watch. Music, I don't know if there's that much emphasis in the world, and this is an idea. You're connecting to that person's essence. Just be an educated consumer before you listen to music. But again, this is why there's such an emphasis in Chabad in listening to holy Nigunim. Yeah.
It's interesting. We go to the chamber music at Duke, and every once in a while they have the day before, the professional group will work with the students. So the students will play a song, and then the professional artist would go, what do you think those notes are trying, what do you think the composer was trying to say? If you don't know what he was trying to say, you're not playing it. So they have a little discussion, go, this is what he's trying to say, now play it with those words in mind. And this chamber music, there are no words, and the sound was different. And then if the pro just held the hand, the sound was different. And then when he took up, you could see that he was feeling the music more than playing the music, where the students were playing the music more than feeling it. It was a totally different experience, emotionally, for the receiver.
Absolutely.
You know,
So
they say that you should, if somebody asks you to listen to a song, oh, this is my favorite song, listen to it. That you should, because, well, you're learning a great deal about that person.
That's interesting, because you can.
So.
So I think the take-homes here are two ways to be careful what we do listen to. B is to know that it can inspire and infect us in many ways. And I would like to encourage people, you had a rough day, to listen to some nigunim at the end of the day before you go to sleep. There's a beautiful calming effect of it. I would be happy to give anyone that wants a sample of one or two Hasidic melodies, and then if you want more, I'll tell you where to buy the whole CD. You can't copy CDs, but for one melody is okay for this purpose, I believe. I'll look it up. Have to speak to the authors over there if that's okay, or I can tell you where to buy the 99-cent music.
We'll go to YouTube.
Or go to YouTube, but this is something that we should not treat lightly. We should realize it has a power. We should utilize it when we are feeling down, when we want to feel uplifted, when we're having difficulties praying. We should listen to music coming from a holy place. I'll finish with one story. This is a modern day story. This happened in Jerusalem. You might have heard the story before. There was a fellow Friday night that was leaving synagogue. His eyes are turning around the room. Many people have the tradition, if there's a stranger, someone they don't know, they invite them home for Shabbos. And he turns to someone in Jerusalem and says, hi, my name is Dan. Do you need a place to eat? And the guy says, sure, I'll come to your house. And the fellow was a young man, comes to his house, looks like this might have been the first Shabbat meal that he was ever at, really did not know what to do. And, he explains some kiddush and washing of the hands. He's nice, but pretty quiet throughout the whole meal. And they ask him, would you like to sing any Zmirot, any Jewish songs? And he goes, well, I really don't know any, but I really like that song that they were singing at synagogue. And he goes, what was it? And he goes, something Dodi. Oh, Lecha Dodi. Lecha Dodi is a melody that we sing Friday night. And Dan's like, that's traditionally not sung at the dinner table. That's more of a prayer kind of song. But you want to sing Lecha Dodi? We'll sing Lecha Dodi. So they sang Lecha Dodi, and that was it. They go then to the soup course, and is trying to strike up conversation with him, not speaking much. And he says, do you mind if we sing that Lecha Dodi melody again? And by this time, you're like, this guy may not be 100% over here. What's a Lecha Dodi obsession? But he does it. And then sure enough, when the main course, he says, please, you're going to think I'm crazy, but that song just touches me in such a deep place. Please sing it again. He goes, yes, but do you mind sharing a little bit more about you? Where do you come from? He goes, I come from Ramallah. He goes, oh, Ramallah. Did you say Ramla? Oh, I have some relatives in Ram. No, he says, no, Ramallah. Ramallah is a place in the West Bank. There are no real Jews that live in Ramallah. Right. He says, no, Ramallah. And he's like, okay, it's fine. It's all right. He goes, no, I'm actually Jewish. And he goes on and tells a whole long story. And he goes on to say how he grew up actually in an Arab home. And not only, you're going to go. And unfortunately, he was actually told from a pretty young age to have not only not to like the Jews, but to have a real anti-Semitic household. And when he was getting older, he started asking a lot of questions and saying, I don't like all this that I've been taught, and I want to be able to experience them and to get to know them as friends and neighbors. And his father was very, very upset at him. And one day he said, I just have to leave and I want to explore what life is like in the other side, so to speak. And he comes right before his mom sees what he's doing. He says, what are you doing? And he goes and explains, and he says, look, if you ever come to a Jewish community, you can let them know that you're really a Jew. And the mom says her whole story, how she grew up before the war, and she met her husband, but she was really Jewish. And she says, if they ever need any paperwork, here is the paperwork that shows my family. And in fact, here is even a picture of we have an ancestor who was a great rabbi. And you can show them this is his tombstone. And he says, oh, really? Can I see the paper? And he shows him the paper. And then he sees the photo, and he starts to shake. It's Rabbi Shlomo Alkovich, who is the author of the Lecha Dodi prayer.
There was inspiration.
Isn't that power? So it touched him somewhere very, very deep inside. So that is the power of music, and we should use it for the good in our lives. Any questions from our online community?
Actually, there's a real lot of excellent questions. So do you want me to...
Let's let the live audience go. The hour is late, but I'd be happy to stay right now. There's some questions here.
Okay. So way back, Roger was asking, Teresa had a related question about the mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, of the destruction of the temple. Mm-hmm. She wonders if Judaism prescribed a defined period of mourning for us of Shiva, 11 months until unveiling. Why do we still mourn the temple's loss by not using instruments during Shabbat, if that's the reason why?
That is not the reason why. It has to do with a halacha. That's more of a halachic issue. There were certain things that were rabbinically prohibited and not biblically prohibited. Those things that were only rabbinically prohibited were allowed in temple settings.
Okay.
So the reason for it's two different issues. After the destruction of the temple, Jews for many years did not use instruments as much. A separate issue is the use of instruments on Shabbat, and we would need a whole separate discussion for that.
Okay.
But we still do things today, like at a wedding, we break the glass. We're about to have the time of the year where we do the mourning for the temple. But there was a time in Jewish history where they discouraged the use of any music whatsoever. But that was unrelated to not using music on Shabbat or holidays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Bob asked, is playing an instrument considered work? Roger seconds that.
We'll have to have a separate discussion for that.
Okay.
I'm going to say no, because it wasn't part of what it took to build the temple. That's what works.
It was a much later rabbinic prohibition. It's a whole separate discussion why.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And if anybody out there is still listening, Roger says that neuroscience studies have shown a primordial power of music in our brains, and that there are musical patterns inherent in how our brains work. Okay, so So I guess that's it.
And one idea, one text we did not do that we should have, and that was another Hasidic Rebbe who spoke about the fact that there are 7 musical notes in a scale.
Right.
And he said that each one of the 7 relate to the 7 days of the week and relate to the 7 Sefirot. And the fact that no one's discovered an 8th, that is because they have their roots in the Sefirot. That just shows how they are rooted.
So today is a Unity Day, and there's music that touched my soul today from the community in Israel. You know, the 3 kids that were killed last year, and the music is incredible.
What is that? 3 years?
Why don't you send a link?
I could send the link. It's called Open Your Heart.
Is that all for the online?
They said this was a great show, and that there were like 916 viewers today. So we're doing really, really well. And Roger says Indian music identifies additional tones and semitones.
Ooh.
Chinese and Japanese music has also more notes. So there are other scales, like a 12-note scale and a diatonic and a whatever, all these other. But
this is just Western. It is the Western kind of.
Well, it's probably off of the major 7 notes.
And the interesting thing is Judaism seems at its core to be an Eastern religion, not a Western religion.
That's right.
Very good.
So thank you to the online people who attended and asked great questions today. Wonderful comments. Tell your friends. We're going to be here next
week, God willing.
Do you have a topic?
I'm still deciding between 2 topics, so that will be announced, God willing, in the next few days.
Okay,
Have a great week.